Awesome. All right. Good evening, Soulfire. And good evening, ladies.
Good evening, everyone.
So glad to have everybody here tonight. There she went. We're glad to be back for another Love and Shadow. This evening, we're going to be talking with Donna Pollard of Survivor's Corner here in Louisville. We're going to be talking about how owning your story works into your healing process, which I'm so excited to delve into for so many reasons. But as we have, as has been kind of tradition over the last couple of episodes, we're going to start off with a grounding meditation. So Kim, please bring us in.
Absolutely. Welcome, everybody. So let's just place our feet firmly on the floor to start, if you're able to do that. If not, if sitting cross-legged feels more comfortable, that's perfectly all right as well. So we're going to place our palms up in receiving position. Spines erect, straight and tall. And more importantly than anything else, we focus on our breathing. And we allow our breathing to be our focus. We allow the breathing to be our focus in this moment, in this moment, and in this moment, and at this moment. Always allowing the breathing to be a tool to bring us back into this present moment, this present time and space together. Making ourselves available for divine inspiration to move through. Making us available for divine power to move through us. Again, focusing on the breathing. Feeling gratitude well up in our hearts for the kindred spirits that are sharing this space and this moment right here, right now. Focusing on the breathing in this moment and throughout our time together. And so it is. Okay. So.
Button.
Are you muted?
I was for a second.
For a moment, I was muted throughout that meditation. I was like,
nope. No, that was perfect. I had forgotten I had muted myself. So would you like to kick us off with introductions as well, Kim?
Sure. Introducing myself, my name is Kim Summers. I'm a resident of Louisville, Kentucky, and have been for the last 18 years now. I was raised in Tampa, Florida. I'm an incredibly intuitive person. I'm a oneness blessing giver. My practice is Shift Therapeutic Massage and Wellness Center. I'm a licensed massage therapist and an intuitive healer. And I have participated in Donna Pollard's workshops, 2 of them, and they're life-changing. So I'm excited, so excited to have her here and to make this introduction.
Awesome. 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 How about you, Jenny?
Gonna unmute myself. My name is Jenny Townsend. I am goodness, something about my energy always zaps our connection. My name is Jenny Townsend. I am a psychotherapist. I have a practice in Louisville. I'm a Reiki master and healer, and I use my psychotherapy practice and Reiki practice to help people dealing with trauma or other stresses in life. And also want to add this part that I'm very, very interested in doing anti-racist work and with my healing. And so, yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Jenny. So Molly,
Mute button. So you would think with all the daytime meetings, I would get used to the whole Zoom back and forth with the mute button, but oh well. So I am Molly Maloney. I'm an intuitive, I'm a shamanic practitioner. I am a Reiki master and healer and a transformational energy coach. So I'm so excited to be here this evening and to be working, to be sitting here with Donna Pollard and hear about the wonderful and amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. And it's such a privilege to be able to be in the same space with you ladies. And, you know, through Kim's guided meditation and then through you introducing yourselves, I just felt so full in my heart space, like just so much gratitude for the tribe that we end up finding in this line of work. So thank you all so much for everything that you all do. So my name is Donna Pollard. I am a certified yoga instructor, and I'm also the founder of Survivors Corner, which is a nonprofit organization that I started back in 2017. And I really began it through my own healing journey and deciding to speak out publicly back in 2016 with the goal of changing the laws in the state of Kentucky and across the nation that ended up allowing my perpetrator to hide his offense behind a marriage license. And so what I discovered in that journey was that there's so much power in stepping into our authenticity if we can start reframing the narrative around the trauma that we experienced. And so I guess I'll take you a little bit through my personal journey and what brought me to that space. And then from there, we can get into some details about Survivors Corner if you'd like. And, you know, when I was born, my mother was not in a very healthy space mentally. She had a lot of trauma herself that had been unresolved and unrecognized. She also was a child bride. She married when she was 13 years old, 2 weeks away from her 14th birthday. And so she had an 8th grade education. And, you know, because of that and so much trauma that she had suffered throughout her childhood, even up until that point, and then the experience that she had and all the obstacles that she had after becoming a teenage bride, she didn't have a lot of knowledge. She didn't have a lot of support. She didn't have the resources that she needed to really be able to recognize how dysfunctional so much of that was. And so by the time I was born, I pretty much became the vessel in which she took out all of her frustration and anger. And I do have a sister that's 10 years older than me. And of course, you know, she definitely experienced some similarities to what I did growing up. But the difference between us was that she was always more compliant with mom, whereas I questioned everything and I had a rebellious streak in me. And if I didn't think that something was right, I was going to speak up about it. And so I ended up getting a lot of, you know, beatings because of that and a lot of emotional and psychological damage as well. And then there were some other things that happened during my childhood that were also just horrifically inappropriate that I never felt that I could disclose to anyone at that time because of the fact that I wasn't exactly in a nurturing environment. My father had been in the military, and then once he retired, he took up driving a truck long distance for a living. So he was gone more times than not. And so I didn't really know him, you know. So here I am in this space as a child without an attachment really to my mother, a lot of physical abuse, as I mentioned, emotional abuse, and then also the absenteeism of my father, even though he was working. And so flash forward to when I was 12 years old, and my father was diagnosed with advanced stage lung cancer. And by the time they found the tumor, it was the size of a grapefruit on his lung, and the cancer had already started spreading throughout his bloodstream and started impacting his cognitive abilities. And at that time, he was given 6 months to live. So, at the age of 12, after all of this chaos, all of this dysfunction, my life just fell apart on an even deeper level. And when I was 13 years old, ultimately he passed away. He was given 6 months to live, but he made it 8. And at that time, I had so much anger and so much frustration. For one thing, my mother, I don't know what she was doing at that time to this day, but she would leave me to care for him. So, I had to change his depends. I had to feed him mashed up foods. And, that's a lot for a 12, 13-year-old girl to take on, or for any age really, but especially all the complexities that come with being an adolescent. And so after he passed away, I started really acting out, and I started getting in trouble at school. I started sticking up for myself with my mom. I wasn't going to let her hit me anymore. I started defending myself and standing up to her, whether it was verbally or protecting myself physically. And all of these behaviors became construed as me having behavioral issues, not as me being attachment seeking, not as me needing to have some coping skills, needing to be able to address the dysfunction, but rather blaming me as a problem, which unfortunately I think is what we do so many of the times to kids that are acting out, really to try to form a connection just without the skill set to do so. And so with all of that happening, I ended up being admitted to a behavioral health facility for treatment when I was 14. And I wish I could tell you that that's where all of it stopped and it got better and I was able to start rebuilding my life. But unfortunately, that's where the trouble really began, because there was a 29-year-old mental health technician that worked at this facility that started grooming me. And my mother, not exactly being in the best mental state, not exactly being the most educated, allowed me to have a dating relationship with him when I was released from the facility. And so again, I was 14, preyed upon by this 29-year-old mental health technician, and that was supported by my mother. So after a couple of years of either him coming down and spending the night where I lived after I'd been released from the facility, or my mother driving me up from London, Kentucky, any of you that are familiar with the demographics of Kentucky, the behavioral health facility was in Jeffersonville, Indiana, that I was placed in. When I was released, I lived in London, Kentucky with my mother. He lived in Jeffersonville, Indiana. He would drive down to Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Mom would drive up to Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and we would meet at hotels. And Mom would leave me alone with him for hours. The hotel staff never questioned anything. 14-year-old girl, 30-year-old man, there's a problem. But nothing was ever questioned. So many opportunities to intervene. No one ever did. And so after a couple of years of this happening, my mother ended up consenting to me marrying him when I was 16. And at that time, he was nearly 31. And actually, Earth Day, April 22nd, is the year that happened, April 22nd, 2000. So we're coming up on 21 years ago of my life taking a complete crazy trajectory forward. So when the marriage took place, I ended up having to drop out of the 10th grade. I tried to enroll in Clarksville, Indiana's high school, which is where I ended up moving when moving in with him to Clarksville, Indiana, which neighbors Jeffersonville. And the high school administrators told me that they could not have me at their school because it would only be a matter of time before I would become pregnant, and that the other parents wouldn't understand how I could be married so young. And so there went that. I ended up having to get my GED once I actually turned 18. And I started working at a grocery store as a cashier, making minimum wage. And I would come home sometimes to find who I now refer to as my perpetrator drunk. He would stage suicide attempts if I did something that, he thought went against his wishes or what have you. And he had become very physically abusive as well. So because I was still a minor, even though you would think that as an emancipated minor, because I was married, I would have some protections around me, I didn't. I mean, I went to domestic violence shelter and was turned away. I tried to rent my own apartment with my pay stub in hand, and I was turned away because I could not legally enter into a contract. So all of these just became even more challenges. And then, of course, there's all that internalized shame that I had, the shame from being abused by my mother growing up, the shame of not really knowing my father, all of the insecurity that came from all of that. I turned all of it inward. And then when I would go and try to seek out help, I mean, heck, even when the police would show up because the neighbors would call because of our fighting, everywhere I turned, people were slamming doors in my face. And so finally, when I was able to break away, by that time, I already had a daughter. I was pregnant when I was 17. I had already been exploited in a strip club because he had me working in a strip club when I turned 18. And so all these things I already felt shameful about were exasperated by this. And so when I was finally able to get away from him and live independently and file for divorce, the judge awarded him custody of my daughter. Because here he was, a man in his 30s, he was a college graduate, he was at the time making more and all of this. And here I was, a dropout I don't even think I had gotten my GED at that point. And at that time I was making like $8 an hour working at a little boutique in Louisville. So on paper, when you look at that, who are you going to think, is able to really provide the care for the child? So I say to this day that ultimately my oldest daughter really was the ultimate victim in the situation, because she had to grow up thinking that I abandoned her, for one thing, and for the other had to grow up in that chaotic environment with how abusive he was as well. So when I was in my 20s, she actually came to live with me when she was 11, between the ages of 11 and 14, before she ultimately went back to live with him. And with that experience, seeing the impact that he had had on her, seeing the impact that separation from me had had on her, and also the fact that I had ran the polar opposite direction once I got away from him. I got my GED. I ended up putting myself through school. I got my bachelor's in business with a minor in HR. I worked for a corporation for 13 years where I just kept climbing the ropes. And so on the outside, it looked like, man, I had really turned things around. But the problem was I wasn't being honest with anyone about my beginnings. I wasn't being honest with anyone about my roots, because I still carried such shame about it. And I thought, all the people that I've got in my life right now, if they only knew, they wouldn't be here anymore. And then when my oldest daughter left when she was 14, I realized that was one of the lowest points in my life. And I realized that I had to own my story, because I could not let this cycle continue with other people. And that's when I started plugging myself into organizations, not having any clue what direction I was going to go in, not having any clue what the advocacy world really looked like or how I was going to navigate it, just knowing that I needed to be plugged into something that was greater than myself and figure out what my place was meant to be there. And through that process, I started getting connected with groups that started giving me the opportunity to speak about my experience. And that's where I ended up finding that sharing my story not only touched people on an emotional level, but it also gave other people permission to be vulnerable themselves. and to feel that they weren't alone in whatever their own narrative was. So not only talking about the trauma, but talking about how we store that in our bodies, where that lives in our physical bodies, our emotional bodies, our spiritual bodies. And how if we're willing to sit with each other and we're willing to really meet each other where we are, then we start realizing we're not so different. And I think that unity, that true sense of being a tribe and being supportive of each other is really what helped propel me forward to feel safe in speaking out. And so what resulted from that is that I started plugging in with people that could make change happen. And that's in 2018, we passed Senate Bill 48 through the General Assembly here in Kentucky, which put an end to child marriage through parental consent. And that legislation that I got to help write, hey, high school dropout, help writing legislation, right? That ended up being syndicated in some other states as well, where some modifications were made, but it was used as a model bill. So that was also really exciting to be able to have a hand in that. And then, of course, I've met so many other survivor leaders along the way that have felt compelled to share their stories, and their voices just make all the difference in moving these efforts forward to protect kids. So, through that process, I started realizing that there was a need for community for survivors that were preparing to speak out about their experiences. And that's when I decided to found Survivors Corner, because as powerful as the Me Too movement is, and as much as I'm on fire about it in a really positive way, if we're not providing folks with that foundational support and giving them the space to really process as they're deciding to share and practice with each other and finding support, and again, that tribe with each other, then they can end up feeling exploited, and they can also end up re-traumatized. But when we provide that element of support around them, then they feel empowered. And then they also know that if it ever comes down to it and they don't feel like continuing to speak for whatever length of time, they've got this beautiful community that they can turn to say, hey, I've got this opportunity that I want to pass up, but would this be something you're interested in? So it just creates this beautiful circle of people that are all in it for the same reason, to really advance our community forward and create a better legacy for our kids than what we've been leading in the past. So that's how Survivors Corner was born. The workshop that Kim referenced attending on a couple of different occasions is a 6-week workshop that helps prepare survivors to share their experiences. We incorporate a lot of meditation, a lot of grounding techniques, and a lot of empowering activities to really dive deep into our stories. And then we also use writing prompts to help encourage and guide that narrative out. And not just what we initially come to, but then as we're reflecting on that experience, how are we able to reframe it? What feels powerful now? How can we go from what was wrong to what is strong, right? And how can we make that trajectory shift, that paradigm shift? So I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have about the workshops or any of the other activities that we do. I know I shared a lot, so thank you again for giving me the space and time to do so.
That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Donna, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're doing beautiful, beautiful work.
Thank you. Thank you. So are you all. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I really, really liked what you said about sitting with someone makes that process so much easier. And that's one of the things in the therapy world is you can use any therapeutic tool in the world, but it is that compassionate witness sitting with somebody that is so healing. So that is so amazing what you're doing with Survivors Corner.
Thank
Amazing.
you so much. Thank you so much. And as you said that, what it made me think about is something that someone that was in a training that I completed recently used to always talk about: accompaniment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're accompanying, and that's exactly what it is. We're not leading, we're not necessarily guiding, we're accompanying, we're just providing that space to be able to really be on the level and beside someone, because we all have moments where we feel strong and we feel like we can lead, right, and take charge. And then we all have moments where we need to play a more supported or supportive role. So yes, I love what you shared about that compassionate witness.
Thank you.
I'm really curious. One of the reasons that this subject has always really jumped out at me is something to take a deeper dive into. I was at a weekend retreat, and I was there with a friend of mine who was talking about her own personal experiences. She had gone through a traumatic experience with her marriage, and was really starting to lean into the details of her own story, but felt like she didn't have full ownership because she had children. And she had children that were still really connected with her ex-husband. And so she felt like she really didn't have a right, or there was a potential adverse impact of really stepping in, owning, and sharing her story. And she recognized at the time that that was a significant part of her healing journey, but was kind of at this impasse that she didn't know how to negotiate. And it really highlighted my own journey, where I was in a very similar position, and still am dealing with this, how to own my own story. I'm struggling with complex PTSD, and am trying, going through. I've been doing tons and tons of work around that, but one of the pieces is, several of the players in my story. I mean, these are family members, people that I love still, and still consider myself close to. However, there was still a lot of really traumatic elements in my upbringing. And, I also feel myself kind of at that impasse and trying to figure out how to negotiate owning my story, stepping into my authenticity, being very firm and clear about what I experienced, growing up as a child, while still, being in relationship with people that were involved. And I would assume that that's probably something you come up against with a lot of the people that you work with. How do you help them negotiate that?
Absolutely. That's such a great point that you bring up, and you're absolutely right. So, one of the things that we always say from the beginning is no one has to go through this workshop with the intention of speaking out. If you're speaking out is sitting in circle and talking about your experience in this completely confidential space, just as a way to process, then that is totally fine. It's whatever is going to feel good and empowering to the person. And I think that's one of the reasons we have so many people go through the workshops repeatedly as well, because even though it's the same activities each time, there's always something additional that you end up uncovering about yourself and even your family and your relationships with your families in the process. And so, I think it's important to know and to really begin to internalize that just because we want to take ownership of our story doesn't mean that we have to do that on a visible level, and there's no less power in doing it in a way that isn't visible to others than there is in doing it on a grander scale as well. And both can fluctuate in time. I mean, I've been speaking out since 2016, and I've turned down a lot of opportunities to speak here and there because it just gets exhausting, just to be very honest. And then I'll have times too where I think, oh my goodness, did I overshare here? I mean, like, I've done interviews that have gone worldwide. I've been part of a big documentary that was aired by me. And so when people come up and say, oh, I saw you in this, I'm like, whoa, what have I done? Right? Like, I still have that. And so again, it doesn't, what you decide is right for you in the moment should be honored. And whether that's just writing in a journal, whether that's processing one-on-one with someone that you trust, or whether it's sitting down with your family and having a conversation, any of that is powerful as long as you consider it to be. the most important thing is safety. And safety doesn't just come in emotional and physical form, right? I mean, there's also the spiritual aspect of it that we have to consider as well. And the connectedness that we're able to feel with each other. Because I don't know about you all, but when I get triggered and I'm starting to feel that shame and that grief creep in, the easiest thing for me to do is isolate myself from other people. And if I allow myself the space to lean into those relationships that I know are secure and that are truly judgment free, and that are also confidential, right? Like that's a big key. Then even if it's just having a conversation one-on-one with someone, I'm able to guide myself back to, you know what? And this is something Kim and I talked about before too. My perpetrator's crime against me is not my shame to carry. And it's also not my burden to carry the weight of it for my family either. Now, however I choose to release that, whether that's, scrying in a candle, asking for guidance, or whether that's writing it out, whether that's casting stones across the river, whatever, we have to do what's right for us and fully honor that where we are.
Donna, I'd like to certainly vouch for what you've said with regards to sharing your story or not sharing your story at Survivor's Corner, because you made that so comfortable for me. I remember the first, and I've counted back in my mind, I've taken 3 of your workshops. The first 2, I chose not to share my story yet. And you were so beautiful about it. There was no pressure. And it just felt, you honored me. You honored that telling you was enough, So then by this 3rd workshop, I was ready to speak. And how freeing that is, being, so thank you. Thank you for that. And as you were talking, it reminded me, as you all know, I've been in AA and Al-Anon, and, part of what we're speaking, telling our story is a huge part of the 12-step program. We have a saying that says our secrets make us sick. And how freeing it is to be witnessed, to be compassionately witnessed. So, Donna, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here. You and I in our lives, there's so many parallels, and again, the power of telling your story gives others permission to do the same. So thank you for that. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's just truly such an honor to be able to accompany you and everyone else that has gone through the workshops, and also just to be in this space with you all, knowing the great work that you all are doing as well.
Very good.
Yeah, Donna, go ahead, Kim.
I was just gonna, we can do that at the end. I was gonna say survivorscorner.org. I wanted to make sure that we gave a shout out, and we can repeat that just throughout.
And it is also in the description too. So if you need to go back, all of that information is in the event description. So it's there.
Yeah, Donna, what I was going to say is I really liked what you said about telling your story and then not telling your story sometimes, because I think that, because you were talking about how tiring it is to tell your story, and this journey of healing from trauma is not a straight line. It is like a very long, twisty, turny path that happens, and sometimes you get better and sometimes you go back, and sometimes you have really good boundaries with people and sometimes you don't. So I just like what you said and want to use it as encouragement for people who are on a healing journey and they see it as like, oh, I've regressed, or I'm not going to get better, I'm always going to be like this. It's hills and valleys, right? And it's okay to rest, and it's okay to withdraw sometimes when you need to do that self-care. So what you said really, really resonated with me in that way.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Yes. And I mean, you're absolutely right. You know, the healing journey is certainly not linear. And I know we hear a lot from people, you know, am I ever going to get to the space where I'm healed? I don't think that that's a destination. You know, I think that the healing is the journey, right? And I don't think that, you know, there's like this one end goal in mind of what life is going to look like once we arrive at the space where we're healed. I think it's just a matter of increasing our capacity to experience it all and know that, you know, when we dip down into those lower levels, that it's not permanent, right? It's temporary. And we do have skills that we can rely on, whether those are internal resources or external resources that we can adhere to bring us to a healthier space. But also honor the fact that if we need to take a day to lay in bed and watch Netflix and eat Skinny Pop and drink Dr. Pepper, that's okay. We can do that once in a while, you know, like that's not something we have to judge ourselves about. Not that I know anything about anything I just described, but truly it's okay. And I think that's part of that authenticity too. You know, we idolize people that we think have it all together based on the images that are portrayed. But just as our traumatic experiences are only a snippet of our life, it's just a snapshot, what we see from those that we look up to and we consider gurus, that image is just a snapshot of that time that they were riding that cloud, right? So, you know, again, it's just so important to know we're all human. We're all fallible, so to speak. Although I don't really like that word. I think just the humanity that we have is so beautiful if we can just allow ourselves to be honest and candid about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
No, I was just saying amen. Amen, Donna.
Absolutely. I think, you know, I know for me, one of the driving factors in wanting to own and be able to tell my story and speak my truth is, and I think this is fundamental to human nature, is just the drive to want to make meaning from our experiences and have that mean something. But I also very much really resonate with the idea, and this is something that I struggle with all the time, you know, in the process of, you know, looking at my own story and examining the details is, you know, like you were saying earlier with, you know, somebody mentioning something to you about this, you know, I don't want to live there. I don't want this to be the, you know, to be the thing that defines me and defines my life too. So it feels like, you know, there's a need to find that sweet spot somewhere between those two poles. It feels really important.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, just as you said, you know, nothing is ever black and white. I mean, we all have so many different elements to us. And I think that was one of the things that was challenging for me as well once I stepped onto the advocacy path back in 2016, because I started a nonprofit in 2017, and all of a sudden this became my life. Like this became how people knew me. And then especially when you are, you know, very public and there's been media coverage, then you never really get away from it while there's all that activity going. And so going into it with the mindset of giving yourself permission to step back and giving yourself permission to say, you know what, I'm going to say no to this. I mean, I'll tell you, here's something. So I'm not even though I started the organization and I am the community enrichment officer for the organization, I do not take a direct salary. I am considered an independent contractor, because that way, as we are writing grants, I get to choose the projects. I get to allocate the percentage of my time I'm going to be spending on the projects that we will receive funding for. And that's my way of establishing a boundary, right? Because I get to do this type of work that I love and I'm on fire about, but I also have some free time to be able to spend nurturing my youngest daughter, who's with me the majority of the time, who will be 14 in June. So, you know, this is that fun age. And I also get to do the things I enjoy. If I need the flexibility to take a long weekend in Cherokee, North Carolina, or, what have you, I'm able to do that as well. So yes, finding that balance and allowing your identity to be so much more than what is publicly seen and the work that we do that we think defines us, it's very important.
So with the people that you work with, what do you find are some of the maybe the breakthrough points or the points that you really see over and over again are the toughest hills to climb in this process of owning what's one story? What are you seeing out there?
There's an activity that we do that is called inner realm, outer realm. And that goes in a lot with what we were just talking about what's public facing, what's really in the inner part of us, where the genuine fulfillment comes from. And so in this inner realm, outer realm activity, we give the participants time to reflect on what is true within them. Where does that genuine fulfillment come from? And then what's the public face that they present? And how much of their perceived safety is rooted in that public face? And that's where the light bulbs start going off. And I think, and Kim, you can definitely, please feel free to chime in and offer any experience that you had. But I think as people start doing that deeper reflection, not even just on themselves, but also how those messages got there, like what messages did they get from their parents or other caregivers along the way that may have stored in their muscles as memories, so to speak. How is that influencing the need to present in a different way other than what's authentic? Because when we talk about the healing journey, it's not just about recognizing the trauma that we went through. It's not just about processing that trauma itself, the event itself. It's really about unwinding the narrative that we have built around it in our own minds, and how that narrative has become a narrative of separation, right? Instead of a narrative of the propensity for unity. So that activity is definitely one that starts sending those light bulbs off. And then as people are sharing and, they hear each other speaking and they're like, yes, I had that experience too,
Donna, do you have people that come to your group that are actively still involved with the people? Molly was pointing out like their family members, maybe people that are pushing their boundaries or participating in some of the hurt and trauma. Do you have people that have a hard time adjusting in the group because they're unwinding that narrative? How do you guys help and support people through that?
That's a really, really great question. So yes, we have had people that have gone through the group that are actively in those situations. And one of the things that we encourage is that everyone has to do what's right for them in their own time. No one that ever comes to group needs to say to another person, unless there's like an active emergency, of course, but no one should ever say, well, you've got to talk about this, or you've got to get away from this person. That has to be a decision that is made at the time that it is right and it is safe holistically, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well for the person. So one of the things I'll share with you from one of the members in our group, she was in an abusive situation as she joined, and she did end up getting out of the abusive situation pretty quickly into the workshop. But she had reported that she still felt the need to check up on him. There was still, this attachment there and this need to see what he was doing. And, it wasn't, she didn't feel that it was healthy. She recognized that it was holding her back from, advancing into her healing a bit deeper. But that's okay, because that's the space that she was in. And all we were there to do is just provide her with the acceptance for what she was experiencing, acknowledge what she felt as valid, and give her the space to make that decision. And then flash forward a year and, she'll send a message saying, I haven't even checked in on his public profile in like a month or what have you. So it shows that advancement that, again, has to be genuine because it's coming from within, not because somebody else is telling us what to do. And the only other thing that I'll add to that too is that, I think if we consider that as a parallel process also to like, how are we forming these groups to be supported and not more like a dictatorship, right? Because if we think about abuse that we've suffered, a lot of times it was people telling us how things were going to be, telling us what we had to do, telling us who we are, right? And so if as providers, regardless of if we're providing clinical services or peer-based services like Survivor's Corner does, if we're adopting that same model, then basically we are unintentionally perpetrating, right? Because we're casting our expectations onto the individual instead of just holding space for the individual to start advancing on their path in the way that they identify what advancing means.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point that you just made. And, we're all nodding our heads about that. Like, yes, we don't want to go from one abusive situation to another. And we want to be able to hear our own voice, right? And listen to our own intuition and have people say, yes, you're right. And we're here to support you. The whole compassionate witness thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And, I think that, because I'll be very candid, I've worked with some advocates that their egos are so embedded in their work. And I know cognitively it's a reflection of their own trauma narrative, right? I can totally wrap my head around that part. I can find peace with that. But it does become frustrating because you see them creating additional harm when they're ruling from that manner and not just creating that space. And I think, that's like when we look at my own situation, right? I was at an inpatient behavioral health facility. How on earth was this mental health technician able to manipulate so many people and get me in secluded areas of the hospital and slip me love letters and all of the things? How on earth was that able to happen? Someone had to have noticed something. But again, if we're not feeling empowered and compelled to question things and, to put boundaries up, whether that's with our colleagues or otherwise, then again, we're just perpetuating that cycle of harm.
It just speaks to how many wounded people not doing their own work are in helping professions.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's really scary. And when I work with clients, I always tell them, you've got to listen to yourself and advocate for yourself. Even with me, obviously, because I'm human, I'm still doing my own work and have my own trauma I'm working through. With your doctors, with your other mental health care provider, you've got to advocate for yourself. So it sounds like you all are doing an amazing job instilling that, helping instill that with the people that come to you, Survivor's Corner. And that's amazing.
Thank you so much. Well, and go ahead, Molly. Sorry.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, and that's really what, to me, when we talk about telling our stories, it really is a form of self-advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
In so many ways.
Absolutely. And I'd love to talk a little bit about this curriculum that we're actually building out for field workers as well, because, obviously we have the workshops and support groups for survivors directly, but because of the fact that we recognize there is such a gap amongst multidisciplinary professionals and how to really use a strength-based approach in handling these cases while focusing on being a cohesive team with each other, we decided to start building out this curriculum that we're calling Cultivating Youth Resilience. And what's so exciting about it is that the curriculum is actually being developed by child abuse survivors. So this is a survivor-informed, survivor-led initiative, and they will be providing the trainings as well. And when I say multidisciplinary professionals, I'm talking law enforcement, attorneys, CPS workers, family therapists, guardians ad litem. I mean, I could go on, because there's such a disconnect, unfortunately, between these organizations and agencies knowing what each other are doing. And when you look at that, not even just from the client perspective, but the impact that ends up, again, perpetuating that cycle of harm to the child victim that may have disclosed, as well as their family unit that may be in a position like my mom was, where they need resources, right? Not justifying her decisions or behavior, but she did need resources. So not even just from that critical angle, but also encouraging them to look at what is bringing them to this work. And where are they with compassion fatigue? Are they at the point that they're experiencing burnout? Are they experiencing secondary trauma? Have they made it to vicarious trauma and really need their own therapeutic intervention? Because we've got so many social workers that are just burnt out beyond their means. And that's not something we should shame them for. I see that as a systemic failure, not an individual failure. But if we don't start having that dialogue and start addressing those barriers within the systems themselves, so that we can start fostering this team cohesion and allowing folks to start relying on each other, just as we talked about within circle, within group, we want our clients to be able to build that supportive network with each other, where our multidisciplinary professionals need to feel that they have that safe, supported space for each other as well. And once we start doing that, then we're able to avoid things like compassion fatigue, because we have that added resilience in place. So I'm really excited about that project as well. Our pilot trainings actually kick off May 7th, so right around the corner. We're doing 2 pilot training cohorts, one every Friday in May, and then the other every Friday in June. So that's another thing, if anyone wants additional information on that or would like to plug in, those sessions are completely free through the end of the grant period, which runs through June 30th.
Awesome. Yeah, I would love to make sure that we share details about that in the group in a bigger way, so they know how to reach you and how to get registered or whatever needs to take place there. Because I have a feeling lots of folks would like to join in on that, myself included.
Yeah, Donna, that is the stuff. That is what we need. We need that systemic change, right? Like, that's what we need. We need all of these interdisciplinary people to work together to take the burden off of one discipline, right? So to take the burden off law enforcement, to take the burden off of all social workers. Being a former CPS social worker, amen, like, wow. And I was right out of undergrad when I did that. So I needed, right? So I needed the support, like a multidisciplinary support. So, oh my gosh, Donna, that is a miracle what you're doing.
Thank you. We are so excited about it. And I mean, the survivor leader consultants that are building this curriculum, I meet with them 3 times a week. Every time I get to sit in space with them, I'm blown away by their insights and everything that they've contributed to this curriculum. So I'll definitely share the details with you. And my goodness, Jenny, Molly, Kim, if you all have the capacity and want to plug into those, it would be such an honor to have you.
I love it.
Awesome.
It would be amazing.
I would love to. I have chill bumps right now.
That's great. Well, I'll email you the newsletter that we're getting ready
Please
to put
do.
out too. It's got a bunch of detail. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be fabulous.
I'm ready to say count on it, because what I've learned, Donna Pollard, is anything you're doing, I want to do.
Yeah, I get that, Kim.
You're
I'm
too
feeling that
kind.
too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sister. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, and one of my ahas in our conversation, this idea of, you know, the whole point, and I'm just going to be a little woo-woo here. The whole point of this whole human existence is to return to love to ourselves. That's the whole point of why we're here on earth, is to remember to come to love ourselves. And how much shame there is in holding these secrets. And I remember the thought of, well, if you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. And how freeing it is when someone really does know you, and you do share your story with a safe person. How healing that is, because you share your story and they love you anyway. Which helped me learn to love myself. The whole point of this human existence, right? So you are changing hearts and minds, and you're helping us integrate. You're helping us love the whole self, Donna Pollard. You're helping me not to cast away those things that I've deemed as, you know, not so pretty, and those things that we don't want to talk about because it's not positive and uplifting, right? And you witness folks, and you teach others how to witness us, so that we can return to that knowing that we are love itself. And that's what you teach us. And I'm so grateful to be on this path with you all. You're power-filled women.
That was so beautiful, Kim. I'm getting teary-eyed and very, very moved. And again, I just feel that fullness of gratitude and love in my heart space for you all. And just to hear that that was your experience really means everything. And, you know, I'll tell you just, again, very candidly, the desire to do that, the desire to help people honor and accept and love who they are, came from my own desire to find that within myself, right? Because I didn't for such a long time. And now finally at 37, I can say that I do. And the voices that, you know, tend to kind of flare up if I make a mistake, that, you know, the voices that try to keep you small, to try to protect you, your loyal soldier, so to speak, whenever those start arising, they're much quieter now than what they were before. They're still there, but they're much quieter. And I can kind of take this nurturing approach with them now. And that's what I want to share with others, because again, I don't think it's a matter of getting rid of all of those things that we have really used as a cloak of protection throughout our lives. I think it's just a matter of, you know, inviting them to the table in a loving way and letting them know we got this, right? Like our higher executive functioning has got this. We don't need them to rule the show, right? We can just love them where they are, just like we love each other where we are.
Again, amen. Amen.
Yeah, that is perfect.
Well, ladies, I would say that we have found our tribe.
Amen.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Awesome.
And again, mention survivorscorner.org. So much useful information on there. You guys check it out. Those of you that are watching, please check out survivorscorner.org. And there's also a donate button. If you go to the website, this work moves. You might not want to be a part of it, but you can donate and further the work for someone who is in need of it.
Thank you all so
resources are
much.
so important. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for being here with us. Does anybody else have any questions, thoughts, anything?
I'm just excited. Everything you're talking about, Donna, is so exciting. Yeah. So I'm so glad that you're in the world and that we're speaking this out to the world too, so that it can go, we can heal the trauma in the world.
1000%. Absolutely.
Exactly. We're breaking the cycles, I mean, our children and then their descendants are going to end up living in a world where hopefully they don't have to spend the second half of their life trying to recover from the first half going forward. And we can plant those seeds to make that happen.
Yeah. And like Kim said, being a little woo woo here, when you do this healing here and in the present moment and the future generations, you heal the past too. So we can make that happen. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love it.
I thought right before we got on, when I owned my story no longer owned me. So just own it and share a safe person.
Yeah. I get chill bumps from that, Kim. That is a big one. Absolutely. Well, we will definitely make sure that all of the contact information for Survivor's Corner and Donna Pollard is included in the description. And I think when I get the details about the workshop, the upcoming workshops, I'll post those down in the comments so they're easy for everybody to navigate to. And I have a feeling that, well, I hope anyway, that you will be back with us at some time in the near future, Donna. This has been amazing.
It would be such an honor to. Yes, definitely. Thank you all so much for inviting me and for spending the time and the space with me. And again, for everything that you all do too. It's just truly such an honor to be amongst such a power tribe.
I'm great.
Thanks, Donna.
Power-filled women.
Yeah.
So grateful for all of you and your amazing
Yeah.
work.
Same.
All right. Much love to you
Talk
guys.
to y'all soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.